A week after Tisha B'Av, saddest day of the year, comes the 15th of Av. 15th of Av, I think we've had shiurim about the significance of the date and its historical background, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that tonight. But I'd like to actually go to the source, which is a Talmud in Ta'anit, that describes this day of the 15th of Av as one of the happiest days on our calendar. So we're going to spend a few moments actually looking at the text in the Talmud, Tanit, and then we're going to see how we can take it a little bit further, a little bit deeper, because reading it at kind of the top level, superficial level, face level, it doesn't really work. So this is a Mishnah. It's in the end of Tanit, about 4 pages before the end, the final Mishnah. Just to kind of refresh our memories, the Talmud composes 2 parts, Mishnah and Gemara. Mishnah predates Gemara by a couple of centuries, and Gemara is actually the commentary and elucidation, explanation, and development of taking it further from the Mishnah. So there's usually more detail in the Gemara. We're going to stop there. The Mishnah says, Rav Shimon Gamliel says that there were no days as joyous for the Jewish people as the 15th of Av. I've removed in the dots the other day that he mentions, Yom Kippur. We're not talking about that. On both those days, actually, says Rav Shimon Gamliel, the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in white clothes, which they borrowed from each other. And the Mishnah says, what's the reason for the borrowing? So as not to embarrass one who didn't have her own white garments. So everybody wore a borrowed garment, and that way everyone would be equal in this. And what would then happen once they were in their white clothes? They would go out and they would go dance in the vineyards. And it seems from the context here that a gentleman would come and watch this dance, and the girls would look up and say, young man, lift your eyes and see what you choose for yourself for a wife. And here's the interesting one. Do not set your eyes towards beauty, set your eyes towards a good family, as the verse states. Grace is deceitful and beauty is vain. But a woman who fears Hashem, she shall be praised. That's from Proverbs 31. It's a famous verse because it's sung on a Friday night as part of Eshet Chayil. Sheker hachein vehevel hayofi, isha yirat Hashem hiti talal. So that's grace is deceitful, beauty is vain. We got to look deeper. We got to look at the inequalities, and that's the woman who fears Hashem. But what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says you got to look at the inequality. You got to look at family. You got to look at yichus. You got to look at where they come from. So that's the Mishnah. The Talmud begins to take this to a deeper level. It says, well, what is the reason? And Yom Kippur, we know it's a day of forgiveness of sins. Therefore, it's a really joyous day. What about Yom Kippur? What about the 15th of Av? And the Gemara then goes on to explain that the 15th of Av is actually the cure, the antidote, the opposite, the resolution, the solution, the healing for Tisha B'Av. Now, we're not going to spend too much time on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is history. Hopefully not just for this year, but forever and more. But what was Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av began in its roots where there was this terrible rebellion around the spies and whether we should enter the Holy Land or not. That's where it began. And the Medrash says about that, well, that was crying for nothing. And Hashem says there'll be reason to cry. We have the destruction of the temples and other sad events that happened on that day, which really surround the theme of a break, a rift within Klal Yisrael, where there's a lack of brotherly love. There's a lengthy story that's brought down in the Talmud in Gittin about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, which illustrate the idea of sinat chinam, or causeless, baseless hatred. So that's kind of the core of Tisha B'Av is division, rifts within the community. So the Gemara goes on to explain what is so special and what is, makes the 15th of Av, which incidentally is this coming Shabbos, Friday night Shabbos, what makes it so special? Says the Gemara, number one, is the day on which members of different tribes were permitted to enter another tribe by intermarriage. Background, if you remember, the daughters of Tzlofchad claimed a portion of the Holy Land, and the tribes, or what we call them, kin, argued that if they would then marry out of the tribe, then sections of the tribe of Manasseh, to which they belong, would end up being, with another tribe. And it's not meant to be. Israel was divided and it's supposed to be, among the tribes. So there was a rule that they had to remain within, that they had to marry. Now, of course, it's a divisive rule. It's a rule that pulls communities apart rather than bring it together. And that law was repealed. And the date was Tisha B'Av. So it's a powerful date in the sense that it recreated what was otherwise a rift. Similarly, it was also the day on which the tribe of Benjamin was allowed to marry into the rest. Now, this has to do with a very tragic incident when there was a murder which took place with a Pilegesh in a place called Giva. And the tribe of Benjamin was blamed for this. The other tribes ostracized them and said, we're not marrying in them. And this went on, I'm not sure for how long. But eventually that decree was set aside, and Benjamin becomes part of Klal Yisrael once again. So you can see already in the first two reasons I've stated, the Gemara has stated, sorry, we're talking about rebuilding the community, bringing people together. Then Rav Bachana says it's the day on which the death of the Jews in the wilderness ceased. So they realized in year 40, on the 15th of Av, that death was over, because every year on the 9th of Av, the anniversary, a portion of the Jewish people would, pass on, and it was always a very calamitous day, a very sad day, because they were mourning the loss of their dead, even though they knew it was decreed. But at a certain stage, a certain age, every Tisha B'Av, basically over 40 years, so 1/40th of the men who were involved in that rebellion would pass on. When it came to year 40, nobody died Tisha B'Av. They thought, well, maybe we are miscalculating days. They waited for the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, and of course, on the 15th, the moon's full. And when the moon was full, they realized this decree has come to an end. So we can see how that's also kind of an opposite of Tisha B'Av. First cause for Tisha B'Av, the sin of the spies, the decree that they would die, and that's come to an end. We have another one here. Yes, Yerovam, son of Nevat. He was in the northern kingdom, and he didn't want Jews coming to Jerusalem. He wanted to clearly create two separate kingdoms and two separate entities. So he built his own altar in the north, Shechem. That's Nablus today in Arabic. So that's just kind of an hour drive north from Jerusalem. On a good day when there isn't any terrorists throwing rocks at you or worse, and that's where he put up his altar, and he said no pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and he kind of in that way strengthened the division of the two kingdoms, not just as political but also as religious, with two different poles, centers of worship. It was his Hoshea, son of Elah, who then took down the border posts and allowed people to travel again and to go up to Jerusalem for pilgrimages. So again, we're building the Jewish people. And then one more. On the 9th of Av, Beitar was overrun. It was a city that maintained its independence from the Romans for several years, and they kind of held out. They were a strong, fortified city. Eventually, the Romans came in with the bulldozers or the equivalent, and destroyed the city, and did not allow the dead to be brought to burial. So they remained there in Beitar, a little bit, something which resonates with us, unfortunately, in this sad period of time. And after several years, they were finally, I think it was three, but I'm not sure. They were allowed to be brought to burial, and so that that happened on the 15th of Av as well. So those are the festivals, um, and that's that explains the reason for this yontif and what it's about. But now, there we go. Okay. Thought my computer was playing games again, but it's behaving for now. Please God. Um, so we understand it's a festive day. We understand it's also a day of the rebuilding of Jewish unity. Does that explain why you've got to go out and dance and look for shidduchim? We're not there yet. What makes it even more complex is as we continue reading in the Talmud, it's going to expand on the Mishnah. Remember in the Mishnah, the girls would say to the boys, don't look at beauty, look at family, look at yichus, look at deeper values. But it turns out, from the words that we're going to read now, in the Baraita, it wasn't so clear. So the Gemara says that depending on their attributes, they would sing a different story. Who are we here? So, what would a beautiful woman among them say? They would say, set your eyes towards beauty. A wife is for her beauty. That's easy to say if you've been blessed in that way. Then there were those who obviously weren't beautiful, but at least they distinguished lineage, and they would say, look at family. A wife is for children. And of course, if we come from a distinguished family, hopefully those traits will be passed on. So that's what you got to look at. So that's what those who had not necessarily beauty, but at least had distinguished yichus, pedigree, that they would say, look at family. And then what about the ones who couldn't say either of the first two? They would say, acquire your purchase for the sake of heaven, provided that you adorn us with golden jewelry. Now, it's a difficult kind of elucidation, expansion of what we read in the Mishnah before, because in the Mishnah, it was a blanket statement. All the girls said, don't look at beauty, don't look at the externals, look deeper. But now it turns out that, in fact, there were kind of three factions, depending on what you were endowed with, what gifts you were given. You would call out to the gentleman in a different way, which kind of runs contrary to the spirit of this day, of the 15th of Av. Here we're talking about reunification, unity, Klal Yisrael being one, and those ladies are saying, pick me, I'm beautiful, pick me, I've got a good family background. And that seems very strange. It runs contrary to what the essence of that day is all about, where we're dividing the Jewish woman into categories and saying, this is what you're going to base your choice on. Please do that. So we've got to go deeper. We get to the next paragraph. The next paragraph is the end of the tractate of Tanit. The very end of the tractate of Tanit deals with fasts. Obviously, that's where Tisha B'Av fits in the context of Tisha B'Av, we talked about the 15th of Av. But just after the story of the girls dancing, the Gemara concludes with the following story. Ula, from the city of Bira, said to Rabbi Lazar, said in the name of Rabbi Lazar, in the future, The Holy One, blessed be He, will arrange the dance of the righteous. He will be sitting among them in the Garden of Eden, and each and every one of the righteous will point to God with his finger. Suddenly, the dance is put into a context. We think it's boys and girls, and it's just, what many, always gets my back up, but many refer to as the Jewish Valentine's Day, 15th of Av, it's called Tu B'Av by many. So it turns out that there's more than what meets the eye. Turns out that there's much more here. And I'm back to my computer and its antics. How are we going to do this? Here we are, back with you. Suddenly we would realize that the dance we're talking about is one that is between the Almighty and the Jewish people. Hashem and what we call Knesset Israel, which is the Jewish souls. And of course, in the world to come in Gan Eden, there's going to be a dance. God will be in the middle, and then the Jewish souls, which are the women in this case, will dance around Hashem and point and say, "This is God." It just suddenly puts that whole concept of the dance of the girls outside Jerusalem and the vineyards as really it's I'm going to use a metaphor, but it's not accurate, and I'll come back to that. It's Hashem and the Jewish people. And remember, Tisha B'Av was where there was a breakdown in the relationship, and the 15th of Av is where we're trying to rebuild the relationship with Hashem. And so we're courting each other and we're dancing around Hashem and saying, pick me, pick me. Except it's a circle, all right, circle. Who is at the head of the circle? There isn't. Everyone in the circle is kind of equidistant and in the same position. And that's the amazingly powerful dance that connects the Jewish people and Hashem. And we're trying to court, we're trying to rebuild this and to make it be good again. And yeah, that's putting into perspective the whole concept of the dance. The reflection thereof in the physical world is that because everything that happens in the physical world is reflective of what's happening above in a spiritual realm. So because the 15th of Av is a day when God's courting us, we're courting him, and we're trying to build a relationship, it's a good day for that to happen on a on the physical sense as well. And that side becomes a day in which the girls physically put on their white robes and they go outside into the vineyards and they try and attract the attention of the boys. But once we understand this, we also understand what it is that they are actually saying, because the words of the Mishnah and those of the Gemara seem to contradict each other. So we need to dig a little bit deeper at our relationship with Hashem. And of course, that's going to be a reflection. But perhaps when we talk about the girls talking to the boys, we're talking about how we address Hashem, depending on our personal level. And this is why I just shared with you the book of Tanya, which we had on the screen for a moment. Tanya was written by Rabbi Shnei Zalman of Liadi. But the actual name of the book, the correct name of the book, is actually Sefer Shel Beinunim. You have it here in the Hebrew. I couldn't find an English translation of this. Sefer Shel Beinunim means the book of the average, the middle road, and it's actually the first portion of Tanya. So Tanya, it's called that because it's the first of it's the first word of this Magnus Opum, but in fact the correct name as the author, which is Rosh Shnei Zalman of Liadi, gave it, is Sefer Shel Beinunim, the book of the average, the middle road. lest you think that, Reb Shneur Zalman is sending us on a road to mediocrity. We need to, and I'm going to do this quickly, we need to understand what he calls the Beinuni. He says you have the highest level of a person's self-control, self-refinement. What he calls a tzaddik. And the tzaddik is one who has effectively destroyed his Yetzer Hara. He does not wake up in the morning and feel any urges. He has no need, he has no, hunger for lust for forbidden things. He's kind of worked himself so much where he has got no evil inclination anymore. It's gone. So he wakes up in the morning and all he wants to do is the holy and the good and the pure. He wants to learn, he wants to daven, he wants to do, holy stuff. He wants to be honest. He's got no pulls anywhere else. How many of those are there in the world? Likely only a handful. Very, very few. Because the Yetzer Hara, which Reb Shneur Zalman actually refers to as a nefesh habehemit, or the animal soul. Oh, the animal is far more powerful. If you pit an animal against like a human or against something spiritual, who's going to win on a tug of war? So that's why few of us are able to actually tame that beast and control it and knock it out completely. On the other hand, you have the Rasha, and if it seems to resonate with you, then don't scream out yay. But the Rasha says Reb Shneur Zalman is not a bad person. It's just he does bad stuff sometimes. And because of that, is a Rasha, he divides it into two subcategories. But basically, it's a person who cannot control his Yetzer Hara. He's human. He's human. We're all given this very powerful inclination, and sometimes it's going to make us make things that are against the will of God, and that's life. And we must just live with it and realize that we're going to have mistakes, we're going to have good moments, but we're going to have bad times. That's the Rasha. Somewhere in the middle between those two, and hey, the author of the Tanya had really high aspirations, is this fellow who hasn't tamed the beast, but has got it under control. Means that Beinoni, that person who sits between the Rasha and the Tzaddik, is an individual who doesn't ever sin, but he has temptation, but he can control it. And he goes through his life, waking up in the morning and having to fight with his Yitzhak to get up in time to get to shul, and not to speak in shul, and not to check the messages on his phone, but he doesn't do any of that. But he's got all those urges that all of us have, but he can control them. So he hasn't tamed the beast, but he's harnessed it and controlled it, and it doesn't ever let him anywhere. And that he defines as the Beinoni, and he spends 53 chapters describing the struggle of the Beinoni, and how he can, work at achieving that level. And in the cover page that I showed you earlier, here's this challenge to all of us. It says, each of us can reach that level of Beinoni, and all of us should strive to reach there. So we're all trying. We're all trying, but I speak for myself. On most days, I'm striving for it, definitely, but I cannot say that I have succeeded. Now, Tanya goes on to say that there's an intrinsic connection between every single Jew and God that is based simply on the fact that we have a divine soul within us. And that's the same for everybody. If you break it down, you've got the tzaddik, you've got the Beinoni, you've got the Rasha, you've got the righteous, you've got the guy in the middle, and then you've got the Rasha at the other end. Now let's go back to the courtship dance that we are involved in engaging with Hashem. We put on those white robes to signify our purity and our desire to be close to Him, and we dance and we say, Hashem, embrace us, embrace us. At the basic level, we're appealing to Hashem and saying, simply embrace us because we have a part of you in us. What are we saying? Don't look at the beauty, because we may not be amazing, Okay, we may not have perfectly white garments, and we have to go and borrow another person's cleanly, freshly laundered white garment. We don't look great. We don't have beauty necessarily, but look at inside of us. And what? Yichus. What's the yichus? What's the family? It's the fact that our soul is part of you. We related in that sense. That's in the Mishnah. But as I said earlier, the Gemara always breaks it down and takes it to a further level. And the Gemara says, it's not as simple as that. On a basic level, that's what we're saying to Hashem. But then we each have our own story for Hashem. The tzaddikim, the very righteous ones, they're the ones who can boldly say to God, look at the beauty. Look at us. Look at how hard we've worked to establish that which we did. We killed our Yetzer Hara. We may have spent days and days fasting and praying, but our Yetzer Hara is dead, and we look beautiful. And please embrace us. That's the song of the tzaddik as he dances around Hashem. The Beinoni's song is not as powerful, but it said, look at, he says, family. Look at where I come from. I'm a son of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. I'm related to you, Hashem. I'm connected to you via their great achievements and their great deeds. And I ask you, Hashem, to embrace me, even though I'm not perfect, because I wake up in the morning and I still have these thoughts of doing things that are not really, congruent with your will, because I still have, stray thoughts and I can't control my thoughts. But effectively, I don't carry it out. I don't ever say anything I shouldn't say. I don't ever do anything I shouldn't do. So please, Hashem, be related and embrace me on account of that. But then we have category number 3, that which, and I specify, with the air quotes here, the author of the Tanya calls Rashaim, even though there may be people who are very good people and they get up in the morning and go to shul. But when they get to shul and the phone buzzes in the pocket, they take it out and they check the message. And then they look at the person across the aisle and they start whispering and talking to him. We wouldn't call that a Rasha. We'd say, hey, at least he came to shul. At least he's there. But effectively, the Yetzer Hara is not under check. It's not harnessed. So the Baal HaTanya, with his very high standards, is going to refer to that as a Rasha. He's not a Beinoni. He's not a tzaddik for sure. What do these people say to Hashem as they're involved in that courtship dance? They say, Hashem, look at us for who we are, and take us and embrace us because we're part of you, but adorn us with jewelry. Just make us look good. Help us to overcome our temptations. Help us to, and just make us look beautiful. Because a husband can make a wife look amazing by going to the most expensive shops in the most expensive, exquisite mall and make her look good with jewelry. So that's the request of those souls to Hashem. Accept us for who we are and adorn us and embrace us and make us look good as only you know. And from there we go to the dance that will happen in the future. And that's a beautiful way to end a tractate that deals with a lot of sorrow, a lot of pain, a lot of historical backgrounds, beginning with fasting when there is droughts and other calamities, and moving on to eventually the national fast days that we have, the 5 days in the year, which are because of national tragedies. And we say, well, all of those will turn into joys. So besides the physical manifestations, which are a reflection of what's going on high with the courtship dance, and that's why we have that celebration of the 15th of Av in that manner. We end the tractate by saying, God, we can't wait for that day in the future. It is said about that day when we'll all stand around. And down here there's tzaddikim and there's Beinoni and there's Rishayim, but on high we're all tzaddikim, and we all have a share and a connection with Hashem, and we look forward to that day. We say at the end of Ta'anit, when we'll be in that circle, we'll dance around you and we'll point at you and we'll say, "You are God."